everyone. This is Jill Hurston with Excellarate. Welcome to today's webinar. Before we get started, I want to do a quick sound check, make sure that everybody can hear me okay, and that everybody can see my screen okay, and our presenters. So if anybody from the audience, could you just type into your chat box that you can see and hear me okay? That would be appreciated. Awesome. Thank you so much. So with that, welcome to today's webinar on the Agile 2022 conference, top takeaways. I just want to remind you, I am recording this session and everybody will receive an email directly with a link directly to the presentation recording tomorrow. If at any time during this session you have any questions, please type them into your chat box. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Mike Watson. He's our Senior VP of Sales with Excellarate. Mike, over to you.
Thanks, Jill, and welcome everyone to today's session. We're going to be reviewing the Agile top takeaways from the Agile conference. This is something that traditionally Excellarate, formerly Synerzip in the past, has done. We typically would go to the conference, get some takeaways, do a little road trip through Texas, and share what we learned. Unfortunately, this year I wasn't able to join those of them that went to the conference, so I don't have any takeaways myself. So as a result, we're going to change the format a little bit, and I'm going to let Rohit and David take it away. Unfortunately, Vinayak was not able to join us today. Something came up, so we're going to have to do his part of the session separately. With that, I'm going to go ahead and introduce the panelists or our guest speakers here. First, we got Rohit Sinha. He's a Director of Product Development here at Excellarate and keeping our tradition alive. Thank you, Rohit. And also, I've got David Wallace, who's Principal Agile Coach from Xero. David, welcome. So we're going to cover several topics. I mean, they're listed here, but instead of reading all these bullets, why don't we just jump into it? Engineering with empathy, Rohit, why don't you get us started?
Right. So yes, I would like to start with the engineering with empathy. And thanks, Mike, for introduction. So this is the keynote session given by Kelsey Hightower. So he's a Google principal engineer, and he shared that there's a need for software engineers to empathize with the customers, with the end users, and it really helps building better software. So he shared an example where he was working for an organization during his initial days. And in that, it was very routine type of a work. It was related to a payment system where helping the customers making the payment. And what like the way that they used to work in a routine manner where they have daily stand-ups and then they work together and then solve problems. And sometimes what happens then when everything goes down, there used to be a war room where all of them go there and then figure out what the problem is, and someone says, okay, why don't we restart the system? So they restart the system and magically everything resolves, so the problem gets resolved. So one day what happened, a similar type of a thing happened. Everything goes down and they all went to the war room. So this time they again restarted the system, but it did not work. And then it took longer for them to resolve the issue, the payment issue. So what happened after this, when everyone was in the war room, their CTO, he came to the war room, and he, in a concerned voice, he mentioned that do you know what it takes or how it impacts the life of users or the customers what we are building. And then he basically shared that this is like a credit card type payment that we are doing. And this credit card is not exactly a credit card, but it is something which looks like a credit card. And it is basically for the people who have challenges in fulfilling their daily necessities and daily needs. So to make them like provide dignity to everyone, they make it like a credit card so that no one can differentiate when they are in a shopping store. And then he further said that imagine what happens if something like this someone is doing, making payment, standing in a line, and there's a big line watching him, and the payment gets denied. So unlike others, this person may not have other needs to repay or any other payment method. So, and these are his or her basic necessities. So that's the impact that it can make to people's life. So this was really kind of helpful in making sure that we understand whatever we are doing, it the way that it is helping people, the what value it is going to bring, and how it impacts everyone's life. So that's the thing that like why we need to empathize, why we need to understand a big picture before developing software. So it should not just be that we are developing software for making our resumes look better and attractive, but there is certain cause and there is certain things that are involved. So that was very kind of interesting for me. The other thing that he mentioned, Kelly mentioned, was about collaboration over working in silos. So that is another thing, because ideas comes when you talk, when we discuss. So that's where the innovation happens. And finally, one other thing that really came out to me was that he said that 10x doesn't mean that I want that I am 10 times better than what I was before. So it should exactly mean that how I help 10 other people better than what they were before. So that's another thing that really goes well with this particular session, which talks about engineering with empathy. Right. So yeah. So
Yeah,
this
so
one about
David,
yeah.
I think David, you mentioned you had a similar impact by this by this keynote speaker. Do you have some slides later to talk about that, or do you want to talk about it now?
Yeah, I have some slides later for this one, I believe, but yeah, so I'll hold off on that for now.
Yeah, sounds great.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Roy.
And an interesting thing here, David and Mike, is like when we are listening to a talk there, right? So sometimes that like, and the takeaways could be different for each one of us. So that's really interesting. But all these takeaways are really important and helpful. And one of the takeaway was like one size does not fit all. So that was yours, David. I really like that, in which you mentioned that frameworks cannot work off the shelf. So it is essential to customize agile frameworks based on our situation. And you shared an activity in which you wanted us to basically come up with a list of activities when we go to bed. Before we go to bed, what are the activities that we do? And it was done in a groups manner during the event, and not all the groups had similar kind of activities. So meaning, even though we are going to bed, mostly things should be similar, but they were not. So that basically talks about the diversity that each one of us, they are different individuals, they have different backgrounds, and this is really a strength of all of us to be successful, because the ideas, I mean, we don't want everyone to think just in the same direction. We want ideas to be flowing from all the different places. And that is one of the reason when for we as a human being, uh, things does not work just like one thing cannot work for all. So it is essential for a project development, like to customize these agile frameworks. So it may not be, okay, this is just a maintenance work, let's just go with a Kanban. So there could be other activities, other things that are also get involved. um, so during this, like, failure is the only opportunity that begin again more intelligently. So that's another thing, that when we get fail, I mean, we should be taking this as an opportunity, because that can help us to make ourselves better, to make our project better next time. The experiment mindset helps. So that's one thing where, David, you mentioned about how it is helping you. And I think the tool that you came up, which is which is a template uh, that helps figuring out like what is the best fit for you based on your project needs. It's kind of a gaming tool, and it is based on the number of questions that includes what are the different type of projects, like what are the type of projects that you are doing, what is your team look like, is it a new team, is it an old team, if it is an older team, but how many new members in the team. And based on our answer, there was other set of questions that asked during this survey. And finally, it shows like what is the best fit for us. And then we did that at real time, and it was like exactly the way that came out was the right framework that we really, I would say it was really interesting, and I really like that. So overall, this was again a good learning for me, which is one size does not fit all. Anything from you, David, on this particular thing, because that was your topic.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I'm glad that this was one of your big takeaways. I did want to just clarify, yeah, like frameworks, there's nothing wrong with frameworks, but they're a great place to start from, but just don't keep them the way they are, because I don't know that I've ever seen an instance where doing pure Scrum or pure Kanban was the right answer. But being able to make those adjustments for the team. And yeah, it's funny, the tool that I built to guide people through the set of questions to figure out whether to start with Scrum or Kanban. It's the funny part about that is I built it using the coaching questions I would ask in a real life scenario for that. But for some reason, making a tool and a game to where they don't feel like I'm like coming in and asking questions just to guide them to a specific answer, but the questions have already been written ahead of time, they actually buy into the answer a little bit better and actually accept that, okay, well, maybe that is the best place for us to start. So that's where I've seen the most effect for that. But again, really appreciate that you got these takeaways from it. I think you've called out some really, really important things there.
Right. I completely agree with your point. Like we need to tweak. It shouldn't be like, okay, Scrum, right? There may be some changes that we need to do in order to make our client successful, our users successful. So I completely, agree on that. Yeah.
Good stuff, Rohit.
Thanks. Yeah. So over to you, David. Yeah, for the next one.
All right. Yeah. Different types of debt. So this is actually a combination from a couple of different sessions I went to. And one speaker specifically called out that what we refer to as technical debt is not always actually technical debt, and wanted to dive into that a little bit more. So on the screen, you see a common definition from Wikipedia of what technical debt is. And I actually, after these talks, kind of disagree with this being technical debt. And if you can go to the next slide on there, what that just described is actually change debt. And the reason it's change debt is if you make a choice, if you make a specific choice to do something, and then later go back and choose to do it differently, even if you knew you were going to have to go back and do it differently, that's change debt, not technical debt. And then they called out 4 different kinds of change, which is you may want to pursue a different outcome to replace the solution you originally built. You might need to add or change features and elements, making the solution more efficient, robust, or correct mistakes or choices that were made in the preparation of the solution. So all of those are making changes to specific things that you had intentionally done the first time. So those are not technically technical debt, but more it's change debt, and it's real. Sales debt came from a completely different talk, but I thought it was a really cool call out, is that sometimes the sales team kind of gets ahead of us and makes promises on what the product will do or when it will come out. And we're not always sure we can deliver on those promises. And so we may end up having to build something a different way or at a different speed than we were expecting to, based off of those promises. And that would be sales debt. That's also not technical debt or it's not even product prioritization, but it puts a different level of stress on the teams because they're having to pay a debt that they didn't actually cause. And then, yeah, examples of actual technical debt. The JavaScript library needs updating. An external API makes a change and you have to change to be compliant, or legal compliance. Xero is a financial software. We are having to make changes when different countries change their regulations for how taxes are done. We have to make changes to keep up with that. And that is actually a sample of technical debt, because we did not choose to make that change. That change was kind of made to us, and we have to be compliant to it. So that's kind of my takeaway in there, is that there are different types of debt that often get lumped into technical debt. And the value of calling them what they actually are is that it helps to then be able to know how to prioritize making those changes, and really just kind of gives a little bit of psychological safety to the team to call it out as what it actually is.
Yeah, I think you just answered my question, David, which is what's the real benefit of classifying it? And I think that last point is probably it, right? Developers feel less bad about the debt when they know that it was made on purpose and it wasn't someone dumb doing something crazy fast, right?
Yeah, lumping everything together as technical debt kind of comes across as if you're blaming the team for it. And a lot of these really isn't the team's fault. Even the technical debt that's an example here isn't the team's fault. So yeah, I just really like being able to call it out as what it actually is, and it kind of empowers that team.
Yeah, great. Thanks for that.
Right, so team-driven momentum. So this is about Space Science Telescope Institute, Susan Reed. So she was basically the one who was taking this session, in which they basically set up the James Webb Space Telescope. It is one of the biggest telescope in the world, and it's very insightful, where everyone in the world is really getting helped by the pictures that it produces. So if you look at on the right hand side, where is the telescope? So the telescope, basically they started from the Earth, which is rotating around the Earth, and then they deployed it 1,000 miles away in the orbit. And while deploying it, they had to undergo various challenges, including last, I think, 6 to 8 weeks of commissioning, installing it, where they had to unfold the mirrors, unfold various things, cooling down, and finally installing it. So if you look down, the picture that she shared, like during the first picture that they got from the telescope was initial image, and final picture after the final installation and the alignment. So that was the one that came, and it actually exceeded the original targets that they had. So that the main thing that she talked about in this was the team-driven momentum. During the whole setup period, taking this telescope, traveling to 1,000 miles, like if you see on the upper picture, there is a moon, and then it's going further beyond, rotating it, and finally installing. The main thing that she pointed out was that getting out of the way instead of pushing the team. So it was mainly the team-driven approach through which they were able to make this thing happen. And because of this, now the world is really getting a lot of insights from this great telescope that they installed. But the installation was really challenging, and they eventually exceeded the limit that they initially targeted. So that was one of the learning for us, is that we should rather like get out of the team, like out of the way from the team, and let them like have a culture where team is kind of driving the things, and thoughts and the ideas coming from all the directions. So moving on to the next one. This is by Melissa Perry, a product design expert. So that was another keynote in which she mentioned about the product strategy. So she talks about that product strategy is not just one thing that we need to think about how we can make the product better, but it is composed of multiple components together to really solve the problem, like what we are trying to solve. For example, the one example that she shared was a credit card, right? So if we have a credit card, that's a product, it's a very successful product. But it is not that we are making a payment at a store that made it successful. but there are other things that involves, including that's the plastic or the metallic material that it uses. It has a it has the account number. Not just it is successful in stores, but we can also do payments online. That's another thing that is involved. And I would see that because this credit card is also linked to our credit score, the credit history. So right, so that can help us making our credit history better. So it has a history of like how we are doing payments. So all these things together really makes it possible to design a successful product. So on the right hand side, she talked about the product thinking, where it involves with the practices. So practices meaning what are the product practices. So the role here, the person who basically helps making it successful is a product owner, right? And then what is your organization structure? What are the other things like that? Everything's together combined to become the product thinking, which really helps you in your organization going to a next level. So one of the examples that she also shared about when we build product, we should look outside of the organization to improve the product value and stay relevant than just looking inside. The example is like Kodak, right? These are the companies, they failed. One of the reasons could be that they looked inside rather than looking outside the world, like what are the innovations happening, what are the things happening. So if you just keep looking inside and try to improve your product, but not looking outside or the external forces that is going on, or how they're influencing the world, the market, that becomes a very challenging to be successful in this space. So overall, it involves a lot of other things. All the components putting together really help solving the problem that can excite the people.
So Rohit, just a question here. Looking outside the organization, I mean, a lot of times folks do focus on their customer needs and all that. And, you know, the empathy thing was an interesting iteration on top of that, right? It's not only what do the customers want or what's going to be most useful for them, but like what is going to make their lives better, right? So when you talk about looking outside the organization, are you talking about like at competitors and other influencers in that particular space in addition to the customers?
Right, exactly. So this is exactly right, Mike. So in addition to the customers, right, what are the other competitors, what they are doing? What are the other influencers in the market? Like in Kodak case, right, how you can make your role better, that's good, but it may not make you successful in a long run because the technology is changing. They may not use role, right? They may just like the way iPhones have the camera and everything. So that's the thing that we need to consider. So product thinking and product strategy is much broader than normally people think. So that's
I think it also, sorry, Rohit. I think it also prevents groupthink, right? Like that's a common problem is if, you know, you've all been working on the same problem for 10 years, you have a very narrow view of what the solution set might be, and bringing in new blood or looking at other areas can really help break that kind of mindset.
Of course.
So while we're working through that, so the next slide is no one really knows what MVP means. Looking at an offline version of it. David, this is your topic. Do you want to just start rolling into it?
Happy to do that. I've got my notes over here on the side too, so I can definitely speak off of those. So yeah, this one was a takeaway I got from one of the talks where the speaker was suggesting an alternative to MVP. And yeah, the title of the slide, no one really knows what MVP means. It could be most valuable product, it could be minimal viable product, it could be the most viable product. But however you define that, even if we agree on what that term means, how do you know when you've reached that? How do you know that what you have is the most valuable product or the minimally viable product? So what they were presenting and suggesting as an alternative to that is testable, usable, lovable. And I really liked this approach. And those are 3 separate steps, where the first step is it's testable. This could be as simple as a sketch on a piece of paper, where you can present it to a user and say, if this is the way this product was designed, would that be usable for you? Would that be something that would be beneficial? And then you can do different iterations of it. You could even write out just a text description of it, and that is a testable version of the product. So something very lo-fi, very simple to produce, but that can give you some good feedback to begin with. The second one is usable, which means that they can actually interact with it. So it might be a mock-up or a prototype of some sort. I've even heard of people like building little like physical models, depending on what the product is, that people can interact with. But or even a prototype with mocked data, where it's not actually pulling real data, but they can see how the data would interact with the interface. But being able to have something that they can actually use and see how it's going to work for them a little bit more than just the testable version is the next step. And then finally, lovable is a product that can actually help the customer do the job. And that can be based off of just the very like basics of what you were trying to build with, based off of what you find out during the usable state. So you would have testable, just very simple lo-fi, usable, something that you can interact with in a limited fashion, still should be fairly quick to produce. And then from your learnings from that, you can create that lovable product, which actually helps them to be able to build or to use something to solve their problem, but it isn't necessarily even the final full version, and then you can start building off of that. So I felt like this is a better approach than just calling something an MVP, because it actually kind of builds out those steps for the discovery to make sure that you're building something that the customer will actually love.
Yeah, this MVP thing, besides the different names, we see a lot of our customers, building MVPs or coming to us to help them with that. And it never seems minimal to me. I think it's really hard to get your head around what minimal really means in terms of this. I think if you look at the lean startup and the mindset there, I mean, that might be too minimal, but I think there's a place in between where, there really is a sweet spot for getting something out there that can work and do solve an interesting problem, maybe not solve all the problems. I think we should talk more about it. I mean, not you and I and Rohit, but as a community, it's definitely an area we should poke on more.
Yeah, and I think that's a great call out. Like, we need to be talking about this more, but we'll also we need to figure out what that small, very focused problem we're solving is. Most MVPs are kind of, they're trying to do a full product, and that's not an MVP. That's trying to launch with this big, huge hit. So yeah, taking a little bit more iterative approach, getting that fast feedback. I feel like this approach definitely feeds into that more agile way of getting the first product out there.
Yeah, great, good takeaway. All right, so everyone's seeing my screen now, right? So we switched over to my screen. I think we're back in the right mode. So success mantras is the next topic.
Right. Yeah. So so this was a closing keynote by the speaker, Joshua. So it was really good. So here he shared some success mantras, and in which be quick but don't hurry. That really made me feel excited. So he gave an example and asked, gave a tongue twister. She says seashells by the seashore. And he at real time asked all of us to try this, do it. So when we were he initially asked us to do it slow, and when we were doing slow, it was very easy to do it. Then he asked us to increase our speed and make it quick. So when we made it quick, it became kind of we started fumbling. So he made a point that we need to be quick, but we don't hurry. So there should be a balance between control and speed, which is very important. And the speaker gave an example of John Wooden, who is a famous basketball player and a coach, uh, and is like Hall of Fame player and Hall of Fame coach. And he was very successful, and his mantra was the same, which is be quick and don't hurry. So what he wanted, that he was working like with one team which was very good, but and team was trying to be quicker every time. They were trying to speed up what they were doing, so they were already doing great things. So John Wooden work that time was to how to slow them down, because he wanted them not to go below beyond a point where they start fumbling. So the main point was that you should do enough practice that it looks smooth, even though you are so quick, but it looks easy. But that doesn't mean that you are hurrying. So he also gave an example where he said that most of like the great companies in today's world, innovative companies, they are successful because they are quick, but they are not hurrying. For example, I would say like Apple, right? So they are launching their products, they come up with the new features. Uh, they are coming up with the features quickly. They are not taking time, like one feature 1 year and the second feature is like 2 years later. But they are at a constant speed releasing them. But it has enough thought process, product thinking, quality control. Then when they launch it, it becomes successful and people like it. So that's one of the things that came out to me, was really helpful, uh, of his success mantras. The other success mantra was like start minimal and evolve, starts with small and then evolve on top of it. The other was like be readily resourceful. And there were a few other mantras that he shared. So this was another kind of a takeaway during the closing note for me.
Yeah, this be quick and don't hurry is I think that is an important concept. And I play sports, and I find when I have a calm mind but I'm playing urgently, that's when I play best, right? So when my mind is slow but my actions are quick, which does take training. I mean, you mentioned that, Rohit. Like you have to practice to be able to be in that mode. So that's an interesting takeaway here is how do you practice that in this context so that you can develop quickly and or QA quickly or whatever your role is in the software development process, and keep up that urgency and not get frantic.
Right, and I think
it's easy to get frantic. I've been there. I've been a developer. I understand the pressures.
Yeah, and this is what, like, sometimes developers under pressure, they commit too much, like the sales pressure or whatever, right? Or sometimes the developer, because of the years of experience, may not be equally at the same level which has with the other developer who has, like, say 10 years experience, the other one has 2 years of experience. So but for the 10 years the things would be like maybe smoother than for the 2 years. And it also goes like it's not necessary, but the main point here is be quick but don't hurry. Even though when we are organizing our sprints, we are planning our sprints, just make sure what we are committing, what we'll be able to deliver, and the deliver should be a quality delivery. So based on that, based on the team, we should basically estimate our velocity and estimate our work.
So Rohit or David, I mean, I imagine both of you listen to this keynote speaker. I'm interested in the readily resourceful. Like if you can just summarize real quick an example or what that means exactly, I think that'll help the audience a little bit.
Right. So in my from my perspective, readily resourceful meaning whatever you are doing, you should be resourceful, even if that requires a different skills. So you should be resourceful enough to get those skills in that team, maybe through hiring or maybe through other means, even if it requires something different from the product perspective or for the component perspective, right? You need a third party to really build this, and that can help your product to be successful. So you should have that type of skills in your team that can really make it successful. And from David, your point, like if you have any other thoughts.
Yeah, I think I would just summarize it as don't limit yourselves. If you need another skill or another perspective to be able to build out your product, go find it one way or another. That there are different ways to do that, whether it's hiring or just crowdsourcing. I actually saw a hiring manager that's a product person that's on Twitter that was basically just hiring their first QA person, and basically crowdsourced it, saying, all right, you all that have done this before, give me suggestions. What do I need to be looking for? What skills, what questions to ask, that kind of thing. I thought that was a brilliant way for them as a first-time manager to figure out how to go about that hiring process. You can do the same thing with building product. Do some crowdsourcing, figure out how to get that information or the skills that you don't have that you need to be successful. Yeah, and just don't limit yourself, be creative.
Yeah, exactly.
Great, thanks. Awesome. Thanks for that feedback. That was very helpful. All right, David, your turn to talk about engineering with empathy.
All right. Let me get some water real quick. All right. So yeah, this keynote has stuck with me. Is one of the strongest takeaways I had at the conference. Really enjoyed it, and the 3 points I have here on the screen were the key things that I've been talking about a lot within my company since I got back. We really want to have empowered teams that understand the customer problem, they're connected to it, they know why they're building what they're building, and it unlocks that intrinsic motivation within them. And that's why they're going to work with a sense of urgency and passion. A lot of times we see our teams, and one of the biggest complaints I hear from the leaders is, oh, they don't have a sense of urgency. And so now I've started asking them, well, if they don't have a sense of urgency, like, do they really understand the problem they're solving for the customer? And I thought this second point where the speaker gave one of the engineers a simple task to do in the software that they were building, one that's common for the customers to do, and the engineer couldn't do it. I was recently talking to one of our engineers, and I asked him, I was like, do you think anyone on your team could actually use the software you're building? And their answer was no. They didn't think anyone could. They might be able to use pieces of it, but they truly didn't understand how the customer uses the product. And how the customer uses it may be different than how the engineer would use it. So make sure you're not building something that just comes from an engineer's understanding, but from the actual customer's understanding. Again, with Xero being an accounting software, most of our engineers don't have an accounting background. There are actually a few that do, but most of them don't. So they have to be able to contact a customer, understand a customer, watch them actually interact with it, or hear them talk about what they're trying to accomplish to understand the problem they're solving, what they're building for that customer. And a lot of times there's artificial barriers that are keeping teams from reaching out to customers. And that's one of the things that we're really working to solve at Xero, is how do we get our engineers more connected to the end user to understand not just how they use it, but also to get ideas of how to even make the solution we're building better. So yeah, these are super important. And I really believe if you're struggling to have a sense of urgency in your team, this is a great place to start to explore, to see if maybe this is what's missing from the team.
Yeah, that's great. Great advice. I have a couple of things, just anecdotes from my own personal background. So there was a customer I worked with a few years ago, Square Root in Austin. I think they've been acquired since then. They had this policy where engineers were essentially required to talk to customers, right? Like, so once a quarter, they needed to figure out, working with whoever, customer service agents or whatever, like how to get on a call with a customer to find out like what their real pain is. I thought that was really interesting. I mean, it's an extreme approach, but it was a really interesting approach to help bridge that barrier. So that's an idea that, maybe would work for some people. The second thing I want to say is a little bit more tactical. And one of the clients I was advising more recently on process and, how to properly develop software, a startup, I've had them focus on epics that were based on user scenarios, right? So a flow through the system that created an outcome for the user. Instead of component based or like some other way of doing it, it's like, hey, if this scenario is something that someone needs to do to get to an end result, and there's a series of steps, and I align the epics that way, and I think that was really helpful for QA and development to understand why this series of steps was being done, instead of just saying I can push this button and some outcome happens, right? They understood the whole context. So another thing to think about that would help create maybe more empathy by understanding better what the client's doing.
Yeah, totally.
So I think there's one more here, right? One more takeaway.
Right, and one point here, like I would say in the previous one, it goes with something like that Melissa taught us on the product design thinking as well. Like come up with the whole thing, think through everything. For example, if I've just take an example like wine and chocolate tasting events, if you go there, right, which chocolate works goes well with which wine, and that way if you are organizing a dinner, just see like what goes well all together, right? Even though that chocolate is great individual, and the wine is great as a wine, but together what works well, right? So that's the thinking that is really needed.
Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. All right, so we've got clear roadmaps, David.
All right. So CLEAR is an acronym. As you see on the screen: collaborative, lean, evolving, adaptable, and reportable. I thought this was like a great way to look at roadmaps. Roadmaps is probably one of the most talked about issues that I see it on the product side, where our product leaders are trying to figure out, how do I build the right level of detail into the roadmap without locking us into specific dates, making sure that it's right for the customer or for the intended audience. And this model, for me, kind of clarified a lot of that. So one of the examples was having the right view for the right people. So the example that they gave was a furniture store that was creating an online storefront. And I thought this was just so simple but brilliant in talking about like what they're doing for the different levels. So for leadership, they're talking about building another source of revenue, streamlining operations, catering to a new generation of customers, and disrupting the market. Like that's the kind of stuff that the leaders of a company are wanting to hear and understand for what you're building. On the program level, you're telling them, okay, we're enabling the business to rent furniture and appliances online. We're taking our in-store model, moving it online. Very simple, very straightforward. And then to the team that's building it, saying we're iteratively putting in place this e-commerce platform that no one's ever done before. It kind of sells them a vision and it builds some excitement for them of, hey, no one's done this. Let's get in here and do this. Of course, at this point, a lot of companies have done this, but for this example, this was early on, and they were like, let's build some excitement on the team. And so by putting this out there and describing it as something that no one's ever done before, engineers love that kind of thing. They want to be on the cutting edge and that bleeding edge even. So being able to have the right message for that right audience is super important.
Awesome, that makes sense. So I'm just getting my head around this. So the message to the audience connection is really what matters. And there's probably some way of connecting all the levels too, right? Like so that the right people are telling the right story as they go down the levels. And I found in my leadership endeavors, that's been really important, right? It's to communicate at a different level the same message, right? Like why this is important and all of that, but maybe you're telling different messages to this point at the team level and such. So.
Yeah, and I think the collaborative aspect of it for the C and the clear is really key here, especially for each of the levels. Like you need to be collaborating. A product person can't put together a roadmap by themselves. They have to talk to the engineers, they have to talk to designers, architects, marketing people. Like it's a team effort. And yes, the accountability for it lands on the product person, but it is that team effort. So keeping in mind that collaborative nature of building the roadmap and building this vision for the team is super important there. We don't want our product leaders going off in a little silo and creating this roadmap and then coming back and asking the rest of the team, hey, does this resonate with you? We want people building it together, build it in a collaborative effort, and continue evolving it. It's not a one-time thing. Roadmaps have to evolve. They have to be adaptable. And honestly, like building it out in a way that is reportable, like where you can say, here's how we're doing, in this case, when you're talking to leadership. Here's how we're doing in building a source of revenue. Here's how we're doing in terms of getting new customers and disrupting the market, where we're building a market share where we didn't have one before. When you're talking to your program, being able to talk to them, are we able to actually rent this stuff online yet? How close are we? What aspects of it have we built out? You can report on that. And for the team, as they're doing it iteratively, you can celebrate those wins as they release different functionality and they see this coming to life. You can report on those wins and those deliverables and be able to celebrate those. So there's different ways that each of these different parts of the clear definition show up for the different levels.
Totally makes sense. Yeah, tying my experience, and it's not very modern in terms of software engineering management, is that product managers had a hard time tying their product demands to the business case, right? So I think more focus there is definitely worth it. And I'm guessing in general we're better at that as an industry, but I mean, it was definitely a weakness that needed some help, say 5, 8, 10 years ago. So I like this thinking, like let's tie that together as part of the messaging.
I think even today it's easy to get into the weeds and get so focused on what you're trying to build that you lose the business context sometimes, especially in large businesses, and you're building just a piece of the whole thing. Like it's easy to get lost in that and forget about the rest of it. So keeping that the entire picture in mind as you're building your piece of it, and that collaboration and that messaging, super important to keep those conversations open and evolving so that you don't get stuck in just that tunnel vision of what you're building.
Makes sense. All right, 7 essential coaching questions.
Yep, I think this is my last one here. So yeah, this was a session that I thought, I don't even remember what the specific topic of the session was, but this this particular slide really jumped out to me. I love powerful coaching questions, and I've found that when you go into, as a coach, when I go into an engagement with a client internally or externally, and I'm talking to a client or a stakeholder and asking them questions, like they know the answers, they know the right things, but asking those powerful questions is such a great tool. And so these questions all resonated with me. What's on your mind? As they share something, a lot of times they'll hold back a little bit or won't even realize they're holding back a little bit. You can ask, and what else? And get them to think about it a little bit more, and then they can add on to it. And a lot of times you discover more in that second part of their answer than you do even in the first one. Asking, what's the real challenge for you here? Sometimes people have so many things going on, so many problems they're trying to juggle that they have a hard time focusing in on and explaining exactly what their challenge is. And that's really a good question for that. Just asking, what do you want? a lot of times people don't even stop to think about what they want. They're so focused on needs and what people expect from them that they don't think about what it is that they really want. Asking how you can help. I love number 6. If you're saying yes to this, what are you saying no to? One of the tech and product principles we have at Xero is prioritize courageously. And we really are bad at prioritizing courageously as an industry. We want to say yes to everything, which is why MVPs, circling back to the earlier conversation, MVPs a lot of the time turn out to be gold-plated final productions. So if you're saying yes to this, what are you saying no to? Can help people prioritize courageously and really focus on what matters.
That's an interesting point, because one of my best points of coaching advice that I ever received was this simple statement of your no is only as good as, or sorry, your yes is only as good as your no. Meaning if you can't say no to anything, then your yes is meaningless, right? So it's a very similar concept, and it's really helped me in my career. That's
awesome. And honestly, it's the way we coach teams. If you think about Kanban, one of the tools in Kanban is WIP limits, work in progress limits. We apply work in progress limits to everything. So if you're trying to work on, as a coach, if I'm trying to coach across 4 or 5 different areas at the same time, they aren't getting the best of me, and it's not going to be super beneficial to them. But if I'm focusing on 1 or 2 specific stakeholder needs, I can really go deep in that and make an impact. So even as coaches, we have to practice this prioritization and practice those work in progress limits. So it's kind of taking some of our own coaching.
Yeah, nice. That's actually a really good point.
And then number 7, what was most useful to you? That's a great retrospective kind of question at the end of a coaching engagement, or even a coaching session, just to, it kind of can help us know like how to set up the next thing. So that one I really like to use in those type of cases. And then this number 8, even though I know the title says 7 essential coaching questions, those were the 7 that were presented in the presentation. But I had to stop and think about what is my like go-to coaching question. And it really over the years has come down to what's the right thing to do. Especially when I'm working with teams and leaders, but they'll be having this like existential crisis of like, we feel like we're expected to do all these different things, but we're not sure what the right thing to do is. And I'll be like, okay, stop for a second, take a breath. What's the right thing to do? And typically they know what the right thing to do is. They just don't feel safe to make the decision. Mm-hmm. By asking the question, you're giving them permission to answer the question. And that's super powerful and can really unlock some things for people.
Do you think a permutation of that is, you know, if you were in charge, what would you do? Is that the same question, or do you think that's subtly different?
It's subtly different, but I think in certain situations that could be the right question to ask.
Yeah, it's similar, maybe not exactly the same. Yeah. Makes sense.
In some cases, it could probably lead to the same answer, but in some cases, it may just be a little bit of a nuance. But yeah, that's not definitely a good question as well.
All right. So I have a couple slides from Vinayak's topic that we decided to throw in here as a preview for when Vinayak gets a chance to meet with everyone. He tends to be more technical focused. I mean, he's CTO of our company. Like, he enjoys technical topics. But also, you know, he's also kind of an HR wizard, believe it or not, in recruiting. So it makes sense to what he would pick here. We can't really talk to these topics. I don't think any of you went to any of these sessions. So, but it is a preview of what's to come. And then he had a next set. And so, like I said, that will come soon. Also, I failed to mention at the beginning, and I'm going to mention now, there is a handout available that you can get off of the system here, or it'll be available on our website. It's the best of Agile 8 timeless takeaways. It's more of a look back across multiple years. I do suggest downloading them and reading it if you're interested in those kinds of things. Like I'm always interested in Agile topics, and these things are fascinating to me. It's in my wheelhouse. I'm a Kanban guy, David, so I appreciate I appreciate your lean in there. I do see the value of all processes. You know, it's like you have to tailor it to the team. I think that was one of the things we talked about earlier. You know, there just really isn't a one size fit all. So thanks again, Rohit. I know you're traveling, and I see you're in a comfortable location in your hotel room there. And David, thanks for joining us. You know, we really appreciate it. It's been a useful session. And final thing I'll say is this will be posted online on our website by tomorrow. So if you want to circle back, or if you want to share it with a friend, if you think they might be interested in some of the things we had to say, it's available for your use.
All right, I appreciate the opportunity.
Yep.
Yeah, no problem. I'm happy to have you. And thanks everyone in the audience for joining us live. And I look forward to the next session. Bye, everyone.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, David. Thanks, Mike. Bye,
Thanks.
everyone. Bye.